The Age of Charlemagne's DLC for Total War Attila has gained a bit of a cult following, being a meme for every future DLC released. With every Warhammer DLC, the tally of how many Charlemagnes it has taken to make it possible rings throughout all the Total War subreddit. While we all know a solid estimate on its budget, what about the DLC itself? Is it any good? Or is it relegated to meme status for a good reason? The Age of Charlemagne takes place during the early medieval period in the year 768 AD. You're given 8 factions to choose from, which are all pretty distinct from each other. I picked the titular Charlemagne as I did beat his campaign before, but I honestly forgot how difficult his initial start was, so I moved on to the Mercians shortly thereafter. The battles for the most part play as you would expect. Cavalry still reigns supreme, if not more so, with heavy cavalry appearing pretty early for most factions. One thing you'll notice quickly is how limited the unit variety is. Many factions will only have a handful of units of each type, and some like the Danes don't even have cavalry at all. It definitely gives each faction its own identity, but it comes at the cost of unit variety and army composition. Speaking of the unit cards look fantastic this time around. Unfortunately, the units themselves don't really reflect the beautiful unit cards that accompany them. I'm guessing this is why the meme is so popular. For the campaign map, managing your provinces is much simpler. For one, there are far less religions conflicting with each other, so there aren't 27 different variations of Christianity to fight with. This makes public order way easier to maintain. Buildings also don't have a ton of drawbacks, unlike the main grand campaign, so no need to meticulously plan out your cities if you don't want to, even though squalor is still present. While a majority of this DLC focuses on streamlining events from the grand campaign, there is a new mechanic added in the form of war wariness. Basically, your people will be affected by the events of the war. Losing battles and getting settlements sacked will increase this tremendously. Each level of war wariness lowers your public order as well as your faction loyalty. This can be decreased by obtaining victories and declaring peace. The concept of this mechanic is a good one, seeing as it has been done in many Paradox titles before, but the execution is underwhelming. It only really is an issue early on where the campaign is most difficult, but by the time you have multiple armies and are steamrolling through the enemy, this becomes an afterthought. Each faction will get at least one major decision to influence their campaign. Charlemagne himself gets a ton of these, such as deciding to war with his brother, and one involving his daughter. The best comparison I can give are the initial dilemmas in Three Kingdoms. These are definitely nice and add to the overall narrative of your faction, especially for our main man Charlemagne, but are too far and few for every other faction. There's also the ability to form nations. This sounds great in theory and is something I've always wanted Total War to implement. However, this is another watered down feature taken from Paradox. When you complete the mission, you get a buff that lasts for a few turns, and that's really it. Your name also changes, but the flags and units remain the same. It's not that Creative Assembly was incapable of doing this. This has been done previously in Fall of the Samurais and afterwards with Thrones of Brittania. And yes, this is one of the few times I will praise Thrones of Brittania over Attila. Overall, I can really only recommend it if you really want to experience the time period. Its streamlining and simplification of elements can be seen as a good thing, but ultimately hinders long-term playability. The new features such as war wariness and forming nations was good in theory, but not executed the best. At the end of the day, it's still Attila under an admittedly period-appropriate UI. If you don't like Attila, you probably won't enjoy this either. Thank you guys for watching as always. Apologies for this one being a short one, but thought there was going to be more here to talk about. Unfortunately not. And as always, this is Powerhouse, signing off.